the summer of 1836, a land surveyor named Timothy Johnson stood at the edge of a Wisconsin cornfield and stared at something that didn't belong. Before we go any further into this story, if you want a brand new American mystery every single night, subscribe. One tap and a new story is waiting for you every evening. Now, back to Timothy in the field. He was looking at a wall, not a fence, not a farmer's stacked stone boundary, a long, low ridge of earth that ran in a perfect straight line through the prairie grass. It bent at a sharp corner, then it ran straight again, and again, and again, until enclosed a piece of ground bigger than 20 city blocks. Inside that ridge, the land rose in great flat-topped hills, pyramids of earth, 3 of them set in places that felt planned. The grass on top was thick and soft, the slopes were even, and the corners pointed at the cardinal directions, like the work of a careful hand. The Crawfish River curled past on the western side, slow and brown, throwing back the late summer sun in coins of light. Timothy Johnson was not an easy man to surprise. He'd surveyed half the territory. He had walked through Indian villages and old French trading camps. He'd seen burial mounds shaped like bears and birds, and long-tailed water spirits all across southern Wisconsin. But this was something else. This was a city, a walled, gated, planned city, sitting quiet under the grass, 200 miles from anything that resembled it. The farmer who owned the land told Johnson he had been plowing up strange things for years, bits of pottery painted in patterns he didn't recognize, pieces of shell carved into beads, small triangles of stone that looked like arrowheads but finer, sharper, almost too delicate to use. The farmer kept them in a tin can on his windowsill. He didn't know what they were. Nobody did. Word of the place spread fast. Settlers rode out from Milwaukee and Madison to see it for themselves. They walked the long ridges and climbed the flat-topped mounds. They picked up potsherds from the dirt and held them up to the sun. And they argued loudly and badly about what they were looking at. Some said the Romans had built it, others said the Phoenicians. A newspaper editor in Milwaukee decided the ruins must belong to the lost Aztecs of Mexico, wandering north before they wandered south. He gave the place a name that stuck: Aztalan, the mythical homeland of the Aztec people, transplanted to a Wisconsin cornfield by sheer wishful thinking. The name was wrong. The Aztecs had nothing to do with it. But the wonder behind the name, the sense that something impossible had happened on this bend in the river, was not wrong at all, because the truth, when it slowly came to light, was stranger than any romantic guess. The people who built Aztalan came from the south, not Mexico, not Rome, but from a great city on the Mississippi River, near where modern St. Louis stands, a city called Cahokia, a city of 40,000 people with a pyramid bigger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza, a city with plazas and markets and astronomers who tracked the sun with rings of wooden posts. Cahokia sat 600 miles south of that quiet Wisconsin field, 600 miles of forest, river, swamp, and unmapped country. And yet someone, 800 years ago, walked that distance, walked it carrying ideas, carrying seeds, carrying memories of how to build a city, how to raise an earthen pyramid, how to set a wooden wall around a sacred place. They came north, and they built a small, perfect copy of home on the banks of the Crawfish River. Nobody knows why, nobody knows who exactly. Nobody knows whether they came as colonists, as missionaries, as refugees, or as traders who simply stayed. Nobody knows what they found when they got here, or what relationship they built with the people already living in these hills. The effigy mound builders the ones who shaped the earth into bears and panthers, were already here. They watched the strangers come, and then, after a few hundred years, the strangers were gone. The walls burned, the pyramids fell silent, the river kept rolling. That is the mystery. A city that should not have been there. A wall that should not have been built. A people who came from a long way off, lived behind their wooden palisade for a handful of generations, and then vanished, leaving only earth and broken pottery and a tin can on a farmer's windowsill. Picture a slow river in southern Wisconsin. It winds through low hills and soft meadows, dark green in summer, gold and rust in fall. The water moves the color of weak tea, stained by oak leaves and tamarack roots. This is the Crawfish River. It is not wide. A strong man could throw a stone across it on a calm day, but it bends here in a long, lazy curve, like a sleeping snake, and on the western bank, the land lifts up into a flat shelf about 30 feet above the water. That shelf is where the city stood today. The place sits inside a quiet state park near a small town called Lake Mills. The grass is mowed. A gravel road loops past a few wooden signs. In summer, the air smells of cut hay and warm clover. Red-winged blackbirds rattle in the cattails along the river edge. White oaks and shagbark hickories cast long pools of shade. You can stand at the top of the rebuilt mound and see for miles, across cornfields and silos and the low blue line of the horizon. It looks like 1,000 other places in the American Midwest, a pretty bend in a small river. Nothing more, but step back 900 years in. The year 1100, this same shelf of land held a walled town unlike anything else for hundreds of miles around. The river ran clearer then, cold and quick, full of fat catfish and freshwater clams, whose shells shone like the inside of pearls. The marshes spread wider, thick with wild rice that bent in the wind. Forests of oak and elm rose around the town in every direction, dark and tall, broken only by trails worn smooth by deer and moccasins. The sky above was bigger somehow, untouched by smoke from factories or the soft orange glow of distant cities. At night, the stars came down low enough to touch. The people who lived here wore clothing made of soft tanned deerskin, sometimes painted with red ochre or sewn with shell beads. In winter, they wrapped themselves in heavy robes of bison hide and beaver fur. Their feet went in moccasins stitched with sinew. Their hair was long and dark, braided or knotted, often dressed with bone pins and bright feathers. They carried tools of polished stone and shaped copper. They cooked over open fires in clay pots, tempered with crushed shell. Their children played along the riverbanks, where dragonflies hovered like little jeweled boats. The seasons ruled everything. Spring brought floods, and the first green shoots of corn pushed up in the soft black soil of the river bottoms. Summer was thick with mosquitoes, and the smoke of drying fish wrecks. Fall meant harvest, and the smell of parched corn and roasted squash drifting over the palisade walls. Winter froze the crawfish solid, and the people stayed close to their hearths, telling stories in the long blue evenings while snow piled up against the lodges. And those walls, those were the strange part. Most native settlements in this part of the world had no walls at all. Villages sat open under the sky, ringed only by gardens and footpaths. But this town had a tall wooden palisade running all the way around it. Logs stood upright in the earth, sharpened at the tops, plastered over with a thick coat of mud and grass. The plaster was painted, some say, a pale clay color that glowed soft pink in the morning light. Square bastions stuck out at regular intervals. little watchtowers where a person could stand and look across the river, or down the long roads that led south. From a canoe drifting up the Crawfish, you would have seen it from a long way off, the pink wall catching the sun, smoke rising in thin straight columns from many fires, flat-topped mounds, shouldering above the palisade like steps into the sky, the sound of voices, the thud of wooden pestles grinding corn, the bark of dogs, the laughter of children, a whole city humming in the middle of a wilderness that stretched for 1,000 miles in every direction. This was not the Wisconsin of the fur trappers, still 500 years away. This was not the Wisconsin of the Ho-Chunk villagers the French would later meet. This was something older and stranger, and far more grand. A walled town with painted plaster and pyramids of earth, raised in a place where, by every rule of the map, it had no business being. The land remembers. The river still bends the same way. The shelf still rises above the water, and the question of who built here and why drifts above the grass like the last thread of smoke from a fire that went cold long ago. The first man to see Aztalan with European eyes was not a soldier or a scholar. He was a farmer. His name was Timothy Johnson, and in the winter of 1835, he came up from Ohio with his family in a wagon full of seed corn. He was looking for flat ground near water. He was looking for a place to build a barn and raise his children. He found something else. Timothy was a quiet man by all accounts, tall and lean, with a beard that had gone grey early, and hands that had been working the soil since he was 9 years old. He wore homespun wool and boots stitched by his wife, Mary. He walked slow and looked long. That was his way. When other settlers rushed to claim the easy bottomland along the Rock River, Timothy kept moving west, following the smaller streams, listening for the sound of water that other men had not yet heard. He came to the bend in the Crawfish River on a grey afternoon in late February. The snow lay thin and crusted on the ground. The oaks stood bare against a low sky the colour of pewter. Mary and the children waited in the wagon, while Timothy walked the slope alone. He carried a long iron rod. He carried a small leather satchel of bread and dried apples. He carried the patience of a man who had learned, over many seasons, to let the land speak first. What the land said that afternoon did not make sense to him. He saw the ridges first, long low walls of earth that ran in straight lines, too straight for any river to have shaped. He saw the corners where the ridges turned. He saw the flat-topped hills rising at the edges of what looked, even under snow, like a planned town. He stood at the foot of the largest mound and looked up at its squared shoulders, and he felt the small, cold weight of something he could not yet name. Timothy walked the ridges until the light began to fail. He paced their length. He counted his steps. He pressed the iron rod into the frozen ground and felt it strike something hard a few inches down. He moved a few feet and tried again. The same dull knock. Whatever lay beneath the snow ran on, a line of buried bones that wrapped the high ground. Like a belt, he came back to the wagon at dusk. Mary saw the look on his face and did not ask. She handed him a tin cup of warm cider and waited. The children, 3 of them, slept under wool blankets in the wagon bed. Timothy drank slowly. Then he said only this: "There is a town under that hill, an old one, built by hands that are gone. In the spring, when the frost broke and the ground softened, Timothy hitched his ox to a plow and began to turn the earth. He meant to plant oats on the high flat near the river. The blade went in clean, then snagged again. Timothy stopped the ox and knelt down and worked the dirt loose with his fingers. He pulled up a shard of pottery. The clay was the color of dried tobacco. The edge carried a curling line, pressed into it long ago by a thumbnail or a small reed. He kept pulling. By noon he had a heap of broken pots and bits of burned bone and a small smooth stone shaped like a bird. Mary came down from the cabin to bring him water and stood over the pile with her hand on her mouth. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The wind moved through the new grass. A meadowlark called from somewhere along the river. Word travelled. Timothy was not a man who chased fame, but he was a man who told the truth. Within a year, a judge named Nathaniel Heyer rode up from Milwaukee to see for himself. Heyer brought paper and ink and a measuring chain. He brought the kind of curiosity that does not let a man sleep. He walked the ridges where Timothy had walked. He climbed the largest mound and looked out over the river bend. And he saw, as Timothy had seen, the shape of a city laid flat by time. Heyer would give the place its name. He thought, mistakenly, that he had found a ruin connected to the Aztecs of Mexico. He called it Aztalan. The name was wrong. The mystery was not. And by then, a Wisconsin farmer with grey hands and slow eyes had already turned the first quiet page of a story no one has finished reading. Long before the first farmer's plow turned up the strange black soil along the Crawfish River, long before any European set foot in the Wisconsin woods, the Mississippian people lived their slow and steady lives in the warm river valleys far to the south. Picture them there for a moment. Imagine a wide brown river curling through bottomland forest, with smoke rising from 1,000 thatched roofs, and great flat-topped mounds standing like green stairs against the sky. This was the world they knew. This was the world they would one day leave behind. Their days had a soft and certain rhythm. Mothers woke before dawn and stirred the cook fires back to life, blowing on ashes until small orange flames licked at fresh splits of oak. Children carried clay pots down to the river for water, their bare feet sinking into mud the color of dark chocolate. The air smelled of wet leaves and corn smoke and the faint sweetness of drying tobacco. Old men sat on woven mats outside their lodges, chipping flint and watching the mist rise off the fields. The fields were everything. Corn grew in tall green rows, but whispered when the wind moved through them. Beans climbed the corn stalks like polite guests, and squash sprawled at their feet with broad shading leaves. The people called these three plants their sisters, and they planted them together because together they fed each other and the village too. A woman could walk through her garden in the cool of the morning and gather supper by the time the sun had climbed above the treetops. In the towns, the great mounds rose at the center of all things. Some were low and round, holding the bones of grandfathers. Others were flat-topped and tall as small hills, with wooden temples on their summits and long earthen ramps climbing their sides. The chief lived on one of these mounds, in a thatched house painted with red and white earth. From his doorway, he could see the whole town spread below him like a map made of smoke and roofs, and tidy plazas swept clean of leaves. Life moved with the seasons in a way that felt almost like breathing. In spring, the people planted and held feasts where dancers shook gourd rattles and wore long capes sewn from white swan feathers. In summer, they fished the slow rivers with bone hooks and woven traps, and the boys swam in the green shallows until their mothers called them home. In autumn, the corn came in, and every roof in every town hung heavy with golden ears braided together by their husks. In winter, the snow dusted the temple roofs, and storytellers gathered children close around the longhouse fires. They were traders, these Mississippian people, and trade was a kind of poetry to them. Copper came from the cold lakes far to the north, hammered into thin sheets that shone like little pieces of the sun. Seashells came up from the warm southern waters, carved into beads and gorgets and cups for sacred drinks. Mica came from the eastern mountains in sheets so thin you could see your fingers through them. Flint came from the great quarries in the central plains, grey and pink and creamy white. The trade roads were long and old, and the people who walked them knew every spring and every safe sleeping place along the way. Their potters made bowls and jars with shoulders smooth as river stones. Their weavers made cloth from the inner bark of mulberry trees. Their carvers shaped pipes that looked like crouching frogs and hunting hawks and small, wise human faces. Each town had its own little flavor of beauty, its own way of curling the rim of a jar or painting a dancer's mask. Yet, across hundreds of miles, you could tell at a glance that all these towns belonged to one great family of cities. The biggest of all those cities sat at the meeting of the Missouri and the Mississippi, in the place we now call Cahokia. Tens of thousands of people lived there at its peak. It was the brightest star in their wide southern sky, and its influence drifted outward like ripples in a still pond. Yet, at some quiet point, in some quiet year, nobody can name with certainty, a group of these mound-building people gathered their pots and their seed corn and their bundled belongings and turned their faces north. They walked away from the warm valleys. They walked toward colder rivers and longer winters and forests that grew thick with oak and pine. They walked, for reasons we still cannot prove, all the way to a small green bend on the Crawfish River, and there they began to build. Far to the south of that quiet bend in the Crawfish River, there was another city, a real city, the biggest one north of Mexico in its day. People called it Cahokia, and it sat on the wide bottomlands of the Mississippi, just across from where St. Louis stands now. To stand inside its plaza, around the year 1000, was to stand inside something that should not, by all reason, have existed in that place at that time. Picture it for a moment. A flat green plain stretched out under a sky so wide it felt like the roof of the world. In the middle of that plain rose a mountain made by human hands. Not a hill, not a mound, a flat-topped pyramid of packed earth, stepping up in tiers, taller than a 10-story building. The locals call it Monk's Mound today, but the people who built it had their own name, long since lost to the wind. From its summit, you could see other mounds spreading out in every direction, dozens of them, then more still. Cahokia had over 100 mounds inside its limits. It had a great central plaza swept smooth and flat as a tabletop. It had ringing walls of upright logs. It had houses by the thousand, their thatched roofs golden in the morning sun. It had markets and ball courts, and an observatory of tall red cedar posts, standing in a perfect circle, tracking the path of the sun across the year. At its peak, 20,000 people may have lived there. Some say more. That made it bigger than London at the same date, bigger than Paris. The people who built Cahokia did not write their own story down. We call them the Mississippians, because the great river ran through their world like a vein of silver running through dark stone. They grew corn in fields that stretched to the horizon. They traded for copper from the cold lakes of the north, and for shells from the warm Gulf of the south. They wore feathered cloaks and carved stone tablets with the faces of falcons and serpents. Their priests climbed those flat-topped mounds at dawn and lit fires that the whole valley could see. And then, sometime around the year 1000 or so, something happened in that southern city. Something stirred, something pushed outward. Nobody alive today can say exactly what it was. A vision, maybe. A famine, a quarrel between great families. a prophecy spoken by a priest at the top of the high mound, or perhaps just the slow, ordinary hunger of a growing people for new land and new rivers and new sky. Whatever the reason, a thread seems to have unspooled from Cahokia in those years. It traveled north. It crossed prairies and crossed forests and crossed the headwaters of streams that nobody from the south had ever named. It went up and up, hundreds of miles up, into a country of glacial lakes and effigy mounds shaped like bears and birds. And it stopped at a bend in the Crawfish River. That, at least, is what some of the evidence whispers. The platform mounds at Aztalan are built the same way Cahokias are built. Flat tops, earthen tiers, oriented to the same points on the compass. The pottery pulled from Aztalan soil carries the same shoulder patterns, the same shell-tempered clay, the same dark burnish that Cahokia's potters favored. The wooden stockade around Aztalan is a smaller cousin of the great stockade that once ringed Cahokia's heart. Even the corn grown in Aztalan's fields is the same southern strain, carried north in someone's careful hand. So, when you stand on the grass at Aztalan today and look at those low green mounds, you are looking at something that seems to remember a city 600 miles away. It is as if a piece of Cahokia broke off and drifted upstream, like a leaf on the current. As if a small, careful copy was made of a much greater thing. Why anyone made that copy is the question, and it is a question that does not yet have an answer. Some scholars believe a band of true Cahokians walked north and built Aztalan themselves, brick by earthen brick, a colony planted far from home. Others believe the local people of Wisconsin saw the southern style from afar, heard stories of it from traders, and built their own version in homage. Both theories fit some of the facts. Neither one fits all of them. And so the long shadow of Cahokia falls across that quiet Wisconsin meadow. It falls, and it lingers, and it does not quite explain itself. Word of the strange ruins spread the way all good stories spread in a frontier town. Slow at first, then everywhere at once. In the 1830s, the settlement of Aztalan had a small general store with a porch built of rough pine. Men gathered there in the evenings to chew tobacco and trade news. The talk turned often to the old walls along the Crawfish River. Farmers had begun to find things in their fields, black soil that crumbled like ash, lumps of clay baked hard as brick, pieces of pottery shaped by hands that nobody in the county could place. An old man named Hire kept a tavern not far from the site. He poured cider from a brown jug and listened more than he talked. His customers asked him what he thought the walls had been. He would shake his head and say only that the timbers must have stood as tall as a tall man, with his arms raised, maybe taller. He had walked the ground himself. He had counted the dark stains in the earth where the posts had once stood. Each stain sat a careful arm's length from the next, like beads on a string. The settlers traded theories the way they traded eggs and salt. Some said the walls had been the work of a lost tribe of Israelites who had wandered west and forgotten themselves. Others said the Spaniards had come up from Mexico, hauling their plumed banners through the swamps. A few whispered about giants, the kind their grandmothers had spoken of back in Vermont and Pennsylvania, the giants who lay sleeping under the hills. On Sundays, on the worn wooden steps of the little church, the women had their own talk. They spoke softer than the men. They said the dirt at Aztalan grew the finest corn any of them had ever pulled from a stalk. The kernels came in red and blue and yellow, sometimes all on the same ear. Something in that soil remembered being tended. A woman named Greenwood told the story of her husband ploughing up a clay pot the size of a butter churn. The pot held nothing but black earth and a single freshwater pearl. She kept the pearl in a tin box on her mantle. She said it glowed faintly when the moon was full, though her husband swore that was only her fancy. The Ho-Chunk people, whose ancestors had lived in that country long before the settlers arrived, had their own quiet knowledge when asked. They said the place belonged to people who came before, people who were not their own. The Ho-Chunk had a word for the old ones, and that word carried respect, the kind of respect you give a neighbor who left long ago but whose house still stands. They did not camp inside the broken walls. They did not hunt on the platform mounds. They walked around the site the way a person walks around a grave. A French trapper named Boucher passed through one autumn and stayed 3 days. He told the men at Hyer's Tavern that he had seen ruins like this, far to the south, along the great brown rivers. He had seen mounds shaped like flat-topped pyramids and walls of upright logs daubed with clay. He told them the walls were built strong. The logs were set deep, sometimes the height of a man below the soil. Between the logs, woven willow branches were plastered with mud and grass, until the whole thing stood smooth and white as a plastered wall in a Quebec farmhouse. When dry, those walls would turn an arrow. The men listened and refilled their cups. They tried to picture a town in Wisconsin built like the towns Boucher described. A town with white walls catching the morning sun, watchtowers rising at even spaces, smoke curling from 100 household fires. It seemed too grand for the quiet bend in the Crawfish. The children had their own version of the story. They said the old walls were enchanted. They said if you pressed your ear to the ground at twilight, you could hear drums, slow drums, deep as a heartbeat. Their mothers shooed them away from such talk, then later asked one another, in low voices, whether they too had heard something in the wind off the river. So the legend grew, passed from porch to pew to tavern stool. Nobody had the whole picture. Each person held one bright fragment, like a piece of broken pottery turned over in the palm. And the walls themselves, what remained of them, stood quiet through every season, waiting, it seemed, for someone patient enough to listen. Step back now and look at the city itself. Walk its edges the way the first surveyors did, with a notebook in hand and the tall summer grass brushing against your knees. The mounds rise out of the earth like sleeping animals, hunched and patient, their backs softened by 1,000 winters of rain. To count them, you have to know what you're looking for. Some are obvious, others have settled so deep into the land that they look like nothing more than gentle swells. There were 3 great ones, 3 flat-topped pyramids of packed earth, arranged inside the wooden walls like points on a quiet triangle. They are not tall in the way a mountain is tall. They are wide and patient, built to be climbed by feet wearing soft hide, built to hold something important on their summits. The largest stands in the southwest corner. It rises in tiers like a wedding cake of soil, with flat steps cut into its sides. Once, a wooden building sat on top of it. The post holes are still there, buried beneath the grass, marking the corners of a hall that has not stood for 800 years. The second great mound sits in the northwest, smaller but no less careful. Its top is flat as a table. Whatever stood there looked out across the river, across the bottomlands, across miles of oak savanna rolling green into the distance. The third pyramid waits in the northeast, and from its summit a person could see the whole city laid out below. 3 platforms, 3 high places. The geometry feels deliberate, almost musical, like the corners of a chord struck in earth. And there are more. Smaller mounds scatter the grounds inside the walls, and just beyond them, some are round, some are long and low, shaped like loaves of bread. A few held burials, others held nothing the archaeologists could name. They simply rose from the ground and held the sky, and that perhaps was enough. But here is where the timeline begins to bend. Because this land had mounds long before Aztalan was Aztalan. The effigy mound builders had walked this country for centuries before the first platform was raised by the Crawfish River. They shaped the soil into bears, into birds, into long-tailed water spirits and panthers with curling legs. Their mounds did not have flat tops. They had wings, they had paws, they had stories pressed into them that you could only read from above, from a hawk's view, from the eye of something flying. Some of those older effigy mounds still sit not far from Aztalan's walls. They were there first. They were ancient when the platforms were built. The two traditions stand beside each other on the same patch of Wisconsin earth, side by side, like two languages spoken in the same room. One language curves, one language squares. One was carved by people who had lived along these rivers for generations. The other arrived somehow, fully formed, with the geometry of a southern city already in its bones. That is the deeper history, long before the palisades were cut and sharpened, long before the first basket of clay was poured to begin the great mound. This land already held graves. It already held shapes. It already held the prayers of people who knew the bend of the crawfish, the way you know the rooms of your own house. And then, sometime around the year 1100, something new came, or something new began, and the older shapes were not destroyed. They were simply joined by stranger ones. This is part of what makes the riddle so stubborn. Aztalan is not a city dropped onto empty ground. It rose in a place that was already sacred. It rose among older mounds, among older paths, among older stories carried on the tongues of people whose names we will never quite recover. Whoever built the platforms chose this spot for a reason. Maybe the river, maybe the soil, maybe the presence of the ones who came before. Counting the pyramids of Aztalan is easy enough. 3 great ones, a scatter of smaller ones, a ring of effigies just outside the gates. But counting the years pressed into the ground beneath them is another matter altogether. The earth here is layered like an old book. Each page is a generation. Each chapter is a way of life. And somewhere in the middle pages, the writing changes. The script turns southern. The lines grow square. Flat tops appear. No one knows exactly when the first basket of soil was lifted. No one knows whose hands carried it. But the mounds remember. They have been remembering for a very long time. The man who first tried to truly understand the walls of Aztalan came by wagon in the warm months of 1850. His name was Increase Lapham, and he was a quiet man with ink-stained fingers and a long, patient way of looking at things. He carried a notebook, a folding ruler, and a small brass compass that he kept in his vest pocket, like a pocket watch. The locals knew him as the man who measured everything. He had walked across half of Wisconsin already, drawing the shapes of old mounds before the plows could chew them flat. When Lapham first stood at the edge of the ruined stockade, the sun was low and golden, slanting through the bur oaks. The grass came up to his knees. The Crawfish River bent slow and brown behind him, smelling of warm mud and wild mint. He could still see the line where the wooden wall had once stood. The earth there rose a little higher, like the long, low spine of some sleeping animal buried just beneath the sod. He paced it out, step by step. He found that the wall had run for nearly 3/4 of a mile, wrapping the city in a great uneven rectangle that hugged the river on one side. Inside that wall, the ground rolled gently up toward the platform mounds. Outside it, the prairie stretched away in waves of bluest stem and goldenrod, and the wind moved through it like a slow hand combing hair. Lapham knelt and pressed his palm to the soil. He found the dark stripes of burned clay, hard as pottery, baked in some old fire. He found pieces of charred wood, no bigger than his thumbnail. He found, in places, the round dark stains where the great posts had once stood, sunk deep into the ground like the roots of trees. From those stains he began to count, and from counting he began to imagine. The wall had been built of upright logs, set shoulder to shoulder, each one as thick as a man's leg. Between them, the builders had woven branches and saplings, and over that woven lattice they had pressed a thick skin of river clay mixed with grass. When the clay dried in the summer sun, it would have turned hard and pale, smooth as a plastered house. The whole city would have shone in the daylight like a long bone fence laid across the green prairie. At regular spaces along the wall, Lapham measured the wider stains. These were the bases of towers, square platforms that rose above the wall like watching eyes. He counted more than 30 of them. Each tower stood close enough to the next, as an arrow shot from one would cross the path of an arrow from its neighbor. Whoever built this place had built it to be watched. Watched closely, watched always. That detail troubled him as he sat that evening on the wagon's bench, writing by the light of an oil lamp. The wall was not just a fence to keep deer from the corn. It was not just a windbreak or a pretty boundary. It was a fortress. The clay coat would have turned aside fire arrows. The towers would have let archers shoot down at anyone climbing the logs. The river itself made one whole side hard to attack, and beyond the main wall, Lapham found traces of a second inner wall around the highest mound. So the very heart of the city had a second skin of defense. He sketched it all in his careful hand, the lines of the great outer wall, the little square nubs of the towers, the narrow gateway openings, set so that anyone passing through would have to turn sideways and walk between two watching platforms before stepping inside. He drew arrows pointing north, south, east, west. He noted the depth of each post stain in inches, and the longer he drew, the heavier the question grew in him. Why this much wall? Here, in the middle of a quiet river valley. Wisconsin in those old centuries had no large armies. The effigy mound people who lived nearby built no such fortresses. They left only the long, low shapes of bears and birds pressed into the earth, peaceful as sleeping children. Yet the people of Aztalan had walled themselves in with the labor of years, with thousands of cut logs and tons of mixed clay. They had built a city that expected to be attacked. Lapham closed his notebook that night and listened to the frogs along the Crawfish. He did not yet know who the builders had feared. He only knew, by the quiet evidence of the stained ground, that they had feared someone deeply, and, whatever they feared, they had watched for it from every side. Inside the walls of Aztalan, near the base of the southwest mound, the diggers found a pit. It was wide and shallow, lined with clay, and inside it lay bones. Human bones. Some were charred, some were cracked along their length, the way a butcher might crack the bones of a deer to reach the marrow inside. The diggers stopped their shovels and stood very still, because none of them quite knew what to make of it. One of the first men to write about it was a doctor named Samuel Barrett, who came to the site in the early 1900s. He kept careful notes in a small leather book, and his words have a quiet weight to them. He wrote about the smell of the soil when it was first turned over, rich and damp, like a cellar that had been closed too long. He wrote about the way the sun fell across the mound in late afternoon, painting it the color of warm honey. And he wrote about the bones. We found them in a place no one expected, he said in a talk he gave years later, mixed with the bones of deer and fish and beaver, the same cuts, the same breaks, as if they had been prepared the same way. He paused for a long time before he said the next part. I do not claim to know what it means. I only know what we found. A young man named Albert Koshkonong was hired to help with the digging that summer. He was a local farm boy, strong-shouldered, used to long days in the sun. He told a reporter years later that the pit changed him. I had grown up walking those fields, he said. I had picked up arrowheads since I was small. I thought I knew the place. Then I saw what was in that hole, and I realized I did not know it at all. He said the strangest thing was the quiet. Birds usually sing in those bottoms, wrens and warblers and red-winged blackbirds in the cattails. But the morning we opened the pit, I do not remember hearing a single one. Maybe they sang and I could not hear them. Maybe my ears had gone away somewhere else for a while. A woman named Cora Hensel lived on a farm just east of the site. Her family had owned that land for 3 generations. She remembered her grandmother telling her, when she was a little girl, never to dig in the low places near the river. Grandma said the old people were sleeping there. Cora told a visiting writer in 1935. She said it was not our business to wake them. When Cora heard that the diggers had found the pit, she walked the 2 miles to see it for herself. She was 60 years old then, and the walk took her most of the morning. She stood at the edge of the excavation for a long time, her hands folded over her apron. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just looked. It was not anger I felt, she said. It was sorrow, like seeing a family album someone else had opened without asking. Those were people, you understand. Somebody's mother, somebody's son. And now they were lying in the sun again, after all that time in the dark. A surveyor named John Trowbridge worked at Aztalan in the 1920s. He was a careful, quiet man who did not put much stock in stories. But he wrote a letter to his sister that has survived in a museum archive, and in it he describes a dream he had during his time at the site. I dreamed of a feast, he wrote, a great fire on top of the mound, and people gathered around it in robes of woven grass and feathers. I could not see their faces, only their hands, passing food from one to the next. In the dream I understood that everything in the pit had a meaning I could not read, not violence, not hunger, something else, some ceremony whose shape we have forgotten. He never wrote about the dream in his official reports. He only told his sister and asked her not to share it. The bones in the pit have been studied many times since. Some scholars believe they show evidence of ritual cannibalism. Others believe they were the remains of enemies, defeated and displayed. Still others think they were honored dead, prepared in a way we no longer understand. Each theory has its defenders. Each has its doubters, and the bones themselves keep their counsel, lying now in careful drawers in a museum, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Whatever happened at the bottom of that pit, the people who saw it never quite forgot. In the summer of 1920, a worker pushing a shovel into the soft black earth of Aztalan struck something that did not feel like a stone. He brushed away the dirt with the side of his hand. A long bone curved up out of the ground, pale as old ivory. Then another. Then the smooth dome of a skull. The workers stopped and called for the lead man. He came over the slope of the mound and knelt down in the grass. What lay in that shallow pit would change how people spoke about Aztalan for the next 100 years. She was young. The bones told them that much right away. Her teeth were unworn and her arms were slender. She had been laid on her back with great care, her legs straight, her hands folded near her waist, and she had been wrapped head to ankle in beads. Thousands of beads, tiny shell beads, smaller than a grain of rice, threaded onto cords that had long since rotted away. They covered her like a second skin. When the workers lifted the soil from her ribs, the beads spilled out in pale rivers. Some were stained green from copper near her shoulders. Some were stained pink from clay. Most were the soft white of seashells, worn smooth by warm southern water. That was the strange part. The shells had never seen Wisconsin. They had come from the Gulf of Mexico, more than 1,000 miles south. The newspapers called her the princess. The name stuck the way names do when no one knows the truth. She might have been a daughter of a chief. She might have been a holy woman. She might have been a trader's wife, or a child of 2 villages joined by marriage. The beads told only that she mattered, and that the people who buried her wanted her covered in something that came from far away. This is where the pieces began to rhyme. The bones in the pit, the shells from the southern sea, the platform mounds shaped like the ones at Cahokia, the pottery patterns pressed into clay that matched patterns found 900 miles down the river. The corn that grew in the fields outside the walls, a southern corn, a Mississippian corn that did not belong in the cold Wisconsin soil. A picture started forming, not a clear picture, just a shape, the way a shape forms in fog when you stare long enough. Travelers had come north, not once, not by accident. Again and again, across many lifetimes, men and women had moved between the great city on the Mississippi and this small bend on the Crawfish River. They had carried seeds in pouches and shells in baskets. They had carried songs and burial customs and the knowledge of how to raise a flat-topped mound to the sky. They had carried memories of a homeland warm enough to grow squash twice a year, and they had planted that homeland here, in miniature, behind walls of pine. The princess was proof, or she was the closest thing to proof that the ground had ever offered. Other graves told the same story in quieter voices. A man buried with a copper plate from the shores of Lake Superior. A child with a necklace of bare teeth and southern conch. An old woman covered in red ochre, the way the dead were covered in towns far down the Ohio. The bones at Aztalan came from people who lived in one place, but remembered another. Yet, the picture would not quite settle. For every bead that pointed south, something else pointed sideways or stayed silent. The local effigy mound people, who had shaped the hills around Aztalan into bears and panthers long before the walls went up, left their own marks inside the city too. Their pottery sat on the same shelves as the southern pottery. Their burial styles mixed with the newcomers' burial styles. Whoever lived at Aztalan was not one people. They were many, braided together in ways no one alive can untangle. So the princess raises a question she cannot answer. Was she a southerner who died far from home, dressed in the beads of her ancestors? Was she a northern girl honored by southern friends? Was she born of both worlds, a child of the long road between Cahokia and the Crawfish? The shells on her body had crossed rivers and forests and prairies to reach her. Someone had wanted her to carry that distance into the next world, and whoever wrapped her did so with hands that knew exactly how it should be done. The shape in the fog grew a little clearer, but the fog did not lift. Now we come to the question that sits at the center of everything. The question that nobody has fully answered in nearly 200 years of digging and looking and arguing. Why did they build it here? Why did people who seemed to come from the warm, flat country of the lower Mississippi walk so very far north into the cold lakelands of southern Wisconsin and raise a small copy of their southern world on the banks of a quiet river? Picture the distance for a moment, from the great city of Cahokia, across the river from what is now St. Louis. A person traveling on foot would need to cover something like 400 miles to reach the spot where Aztalan would rise. That is not a stroll. That is months of walking through changing country, over hills, across rivers, through forests where the trees grow so close together the sun barely touches the ground. The traveler would pass through the lands of many different peoples, each with their own tongue, their own customs, their own ways of welcoming or refusing a stranger. By the time the walker reached the Crawfish River, the air would taste different. The winters would be longer, the corn would grow slower in the shorter season, and still, somewhere around the year 1001, somebody decided this was the place. One idea goes like this. Aztalan was an outpost, a planted colony sent north by the great mother city of Cahokia. At the height of its power, the way Rome once sent her sons to build small Romes along the edges of her world. The platform mounds, the stockade, the layout of the plaza, all of it follows the southern pattern so closely that some archaeologists believe the builders must have carried the blueprint in their heads. They came north for something. Maybe copper from the shores of Lake Superior, maybe shells traded down from the cold lakes, maybe simply for the wild rice that grows thick in Wisconsin marshes, or for furs, or for the salt licks deer gather around. In this telling, Aztalan was a frontier station, a place where southern people lived and worked, and sent goods back home along the long, thin thread of trail. Another idea cuts the opposite way. In this telling, the people of Aztalan were locals. They were the descendants of the effigy mound builders, the ones who had already shaped the Wisconsin land into long sleeping bears and turtles and birds in the grass. They watched the great southern cities rise. They heard the stories that traveling traders carried up the rivers, and they decided to borrow. They built platform mounds because they had seen platform mounds. They raised a stockade because they had heard of stockades. They were not colonists from somewhere else. They were Wisconsin people putting on a southern coat, trying out a new way of living to see if it suited them. A third idea sits somewhere in the middle, and it is the one that grows stronger the longer you look at the bones and the broken pots. In this telling, both things are true. A small group of Southerners did come north, maybe a few families, maybe a single clan, maybe traders who decided to stay. They settled at this bend in the river, and they built what they remembered, and the local people joined them. The two groups lived side by side, mixing their pottery styles, sharing food, marrying back and forth, raising children who knew both old ways at once. Aztalan, in this telling, was a meeting place, a handshake made of earth and timber. But none of these ideas fully explains the strangeness of the location. Aztalan sits at the very northern edge of where corn will grow well. The winters bite hard. The growing season is short. If you wanted to build a great Mississippian city, this is not the easy choice. This is the difficult choice. And that difficulty is what makes the mystery so heavy. Because nobody builds a stockaded town with 3 platform mounds and a careful plaza for no reason. Somebody wanted to be here. Somebody needed to be here. And whatever that reason was, it was strong enough to pull people across hundreds of miles of wild country and hold them in this cold valley for more than 200 years. Maybe it was trade. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was a story we have lost, the kind of story that gets people up from their warm fires and sends them walking north into the unknown, because something at the end of that walking matters more than comfort. Whatever it was, it brought them here, and then, in time, it let them go. Now here is the detail that will not let you sleep easy, even though Sleep is exactly what you came here for. It is the strange little fact that sits at the center of Aztalan like a stone in still water, sending out ripples no one can quite chase to the shore. The people of Aztalan had things they should not have had inside the dirt of that small town on the Crawfish River. Archaeologists have pulled out copper from the Lake Superior shore, hundreds of miles to the north. They have pulled out marine shell from the warm Gulf of Mexico, more than 1,000 miles to the south. They have found chert blades made from stone quarried in faraway hills, and pottery painted in styles that match cities along the lower Mississippi. A village no bigger than a few city blocks held pieces of a continent inside it. Picture what that means for a moment. A single bead, smooth and small as a fingernail, carved from a whelk shell that once sat at the bottom of a salt sea where no one in Wisconsin had ever stood. That bead traveled. It passed from hand to hand, across rivers wide as lakes, through forests where the trees grew tall as steeples, over prairies where the grass swallowed a walking man to the shoulder. Someone carried it, then someone else again. And at the end of all that walking, it came to rest in the cold, black soil beside the Crawfish. The copper came the other way, long sheets of it, hammered thin and bright as a struck match, mined from the great red rocks along Lake Superior, where the water sits like beaten tin under a grey sky. The old copper culture had worked that metal for thousands of years before Aztalan ever rose. By the time the mound builders settled in, those copper roads were ancient. The traders followed them like deer follow their own paths through the pines. These were not roads as you might picture them. No cobblestones, no mile markers. They were rivers, mostly. The Mississippi running like a slow silver spine down the middle of the continent. The Ohio flowing in from the east, the Wisconsin and the Rock, and the Illinois branching off like veins on a leaf. A man with a dugout canoe and a strong back could move farther in a week than a man on foot could move in a month. The water did the work. The current carried the cargo, and the cargo was wonderful. Galena, that heavy grey lead ore that shines like dull mirror when you crack it open. Mica from the Appalachians, thin as paper and bright as ice. Pipestone from Minnesota, soft and red as old blood. Obsidian flakes from the Rocky Mountains, black as wet glass. Shark teeth, alligator skulls, feathers from birds that no Wisconsin child had ever seen alive. The strange thing is not just that these things reached Aztalan. The strange thing is what it tells you about the world that brought them. Somewhere, somehow, there were people who knew the way. People who knew which bend in which river led to which portage. People who knew which tribe along which shore would welcome a stranger with copper and which would not. People who knew the words to say, the gifts to offer, the names of the chiefs 3 rivers downstream. This was a continent stitched together by walking and paddling, by memory and song, by the children of traders who grew up hearing the names of distant places and the prices things fetched there. Aztalan sat inside that web like a knot in a fishing net, a small knot, a faraway knot, but a knot all the same, holding strands that ran south to the Gulf, and north to the lakes, and east to the mountains, and west into the prairies that had no end. That is the impossible detail. Not that one village had copper, not that one village had shell, but that one small village, set down in the cold north woods, sat at the meeting point of trade roads that crossed a continent, roads no one ever drew on a map, roads no one ever named, roads that vanished when the people who walked them vanished, leaving only the little treasures behind, scattered in the dirt like seeds from a basket someone dropped while running. Turn that over in your mind a while. A bead from the salt sea, a sheet of red metal from the cold lake, both of them resting in the same handful of Wisconsin earth, brought there by feet you cannot see, and hands you cannot name. The roads are gone, the walkers are gone, only the gifts remain. Not everyone buys the grand story of Aztalan. Not everyone believes a band of Southerners walked 1,000 miles to plant a copy of Cahokia on the Crawfish River. There have always been skeptics, and their voices are worth hearing. They speak softly, with charts and soil samples and old pieces of pottery turned over in their hands. They don't want a legend, they want a simpler answer. The skeptics begin with the corn. Corn is the great traveler of the ancient world, and it does not need a colony to spread. A seed can pass from one hand to the next, across 1,000 campfires. An idea can ride along with it. The skeptics say the people who built Aztalan were local. They had always lived here. They saw what was happening down south, heard the stories from passing traders, and decided to try it themselves. The mounds, the walls, the plaza, all of it borrowed, the way a young town borrows the look of a bigger one. They point to the Catfish. The bones found in the trash pits of Aztalan come from fish pulled out of the Crawfish River, not the Mississippi. The deer were local deer. The clay in most of the pots came from local banks. If this was a southern colony, the skeptics ask, why does the garbage look so northern? Why does the dinner table look like Wisconsin and not Illinois? They have more. The shapes of many cooking pots at Aztalan match older styles already used in the region. The houses, when you strip away the palisade, sit on the same kind of square frame people had been building for generations. The skeptics say a real colony would carry its kitchen with it. A real colony would eat the way home ate, and the kitchens at Aztalan, mostly, ate like the woods around them. There is the matter of the fires too, the hearths inside the walls, burned year after year, with no sign of long winters, when the place sat empty. The skeptics say that points to ordinary people living ordinary lives, not pilgrims, not soldiers from a far city, just families, cooking, sleeping, raising children, doing what families do. The grand theory of the southern outpost, they say, dresses up a simple farming town in borrowed robes. These are good arguments. They are careful, patient, and built on real evidence. A reasonable person could listen to them and nod and decide the mystery is no mystery at all, just a local town that copied a fashion from down the river. Just corn and catfish and the slow drift of ideas across a wide land. But then the skeptics reach a place where their words slow down, because there are things at Aztalan that local imitation cannot easily explain. The platform mounds are not rough copies. They are built with the exact stepped shape, the exact orientation to the sun, the exact placement around a plaza that you find in the great Mississippian cities. A village copying a fashion gets the surface right and the bones wrong. Aztalan got the bones right. Someone there knew how these places were supposed to be laid out, down to the angles. The pottery tells a similar story. Most of it is local, yes, but a small share is not. A small share is shell-tempered, made in the southern way, with shapes and markings that match wares from Cahokia and its neighbors. Those pots were not copies. They were the real thing, carried up the rivers, set down inside the walls. Someone at Aztalan had hands that had once worked southern clay, and the palisade itself. That wall of upright logs, with its bastions spaced like teeth along a jaw, that is not a style a northern village stumbles into on its own. It is a southern military design. It shows up at Cahokia and at other Mississippian centers. To build it at Aztalan, someone had to have seen it, walked along it, understood why each tower stood where it stood. So the skeptics pause. They do not give up their argument, because their argument is strong, that they admit that pure local imitation cannot quite carry the whole weight. Something from the south reached this bend in the river, maybe not a full colony, maybe not an army, maybe only a handful of people, walking north with seeds and stories and the memory of a great city in their heads. Enough to teach, enough to leave a mark deep in the soil. The fires kept burning, the corn kept growing, and the question of who lit those first flames stays unsettled, the way a coal stays warm long after the flame has gone. Outside the wooden walls of Aztalan, in the soft grass between the river and the gate, there were other homes. Smaller homes, round homes built in the style of the local people, the ones who had lived along the Crawfish River long before the mound builders arrived. Their pots were different, their tools were different, their dead were buried in a different way, and yet there they were, camped in the shadow of the great palisade, close enough to hear the drums at night. For a long time, the diggers who studied Aztalan tried to ignore those outer homes. They were a puzzle that did not fit. The story everyone wanted to tell was a clean one. Strangers came up from the south. They built their city. They lived inside the walls. They kept to themselves. But the dirt told a messier truth. The believers in this story are the ones who looked at those outer homes and refused to look away. Archaeologists like Lynn Goldstein and Robert Birmingham spent years sifting through the soil at Aztalan. They were quiet people, careful people. They did not shout. They did not write wild books with golden covers. They just kept finding what they kept finding. And what they kept finding was that the people inside Aztalan and the people outside Aztalan were not the same people. The pots told the story first. Inside the walls, the broken pieces were shell-tempered, smooth, decorated in the style of Cahokia, far to the south, outside the walls. The pieces were grit-tempered, thicker, made the way the local woodland people had been making them for 1,000 years. Two different traditions, two different hands, living side by side, sharing the same river, sharing the same fires for cooking the same corn. The believers said something simple and patient. They said Aztalan was not just a colony of strangers planted in foreign soil. It was a meeting place, a blending, a long handshake between two ways of life that had found a reason to stand together along one quiet bend of water. That theory cost them something. The older books had painted Aztalan as a lonely outpost, a piece of the south stranded in the north, surrounded by people who feared it or hated it. That story was tidy. It made sense in a textbook. To say instead that the locals and the newcomers were tangled up together, trading pots, sharing meals, maybe even marrying into each other's families, was a harder story to tell. It had loose ends. It had questions no shovel could answer, but the believers held to it. They pointed to the gardens. The same kinds of corn grew on both sides of the wall. They pointed to the bones of fish and deer, butchered the same way in both places. They pointed to the tools, the awls and scrapers that traveled freely between the inner town and the outer homes. The wall, they said, was not a line between friends and enemies. It was something stranger, a border that people crossed every day to bring milk and firewood and gossip. Some of these researchers were laughed at in their younger years. Others were simply ignored. The grand old idea of a southern empire pushing its frontier north was a powerful one, and it did not give up easily. But the believers kept digging. They wrote their reports in plain language. They published their charts. They walked school children through the rebuilt palisade and pointed to the post holes of the outer homes and said, "See, people lived here too, people who were already here when the mound builders came." What they gained by speaking up was a richer Aztalan, a living Aztalan, not a frozen ruin, but a town with smoke rising from two kinds of hearths, a town where two languages might have been spoken across the same cooking fire, a town where a child born inside the war and a child born outside it might have grown up playing the same games along the same riverbank. The mystery did not go away, it deepened. Because if the locals and the newcomers truly mingled, then why the wall at all? Why the watching towers? Why the sharpened logs pointing outward at the sky? Something at Aztalan was being kept out, or kept in, or kept apart, even as daily life flowed freely across the boundary. The believers do not pretend to know the full answer. They only say this: the old story was too simple. The dirt is honest, and the dirt says two peoples lived here together. Whatever happened next at Aztalan, it happened to both of them. Long before any settler from the east set foot near the Crawfish River, the French came through these woods. They came in canoes hung low with bundles of fur. They came with iron traps and tin cups and beads to trade. And they came with open ears, because a trapper who did not listen did not last long in a country he did not know. The Ho-Chunk people lived along these rivers then. They knew the land the way a man knows the lines on his own hand. Every bend, every spring, every meadow had a name and a story. And when the French asked about the strange flat hills near the river bend, the Ho-Chunk had answers, though the answers came slow and careful. They told the trappers the place was old, older than memory, older than the songs their grandmothers sang. The Ho-Chunk did not build there. They did not camp there. They passed through it the way a man passes through a quiet church, with soft feet and lowered voices. The land itself, they said, remembered, and if you walked it long enough, the land would let you feel what it remembered. The trees told part of the story. Around the old ruined walls, the oaks grew in odd shapes. Some leaned away from the mounds, as if pushed by a wind no one could feel. Others grew thick and twisted, their bark furrowed deep, their roots crawling over the buried timbers like fingers searching for something lost. The forest there was darker than the forest just a mile west. The light fell differently through those leaves. The shadows seemed to pool on the ground like spilled ink. In certain meadows near the river, the grass came up thin and yellow, no matter the season. Tall prairie blooms thrived everywhere else, but on those patches the soil seemed tired. The Ho-Chunk said fires had burned there once, big fires, the kind that scorch the earth so deep that grass forgets how to grow. The river itself had moved. The Crawfish does not flow today where it flowed in the old days. Over the centuries it had wandered, shifting its banks the way a sleeping man shifts in his blankets. Old channels lay dry in the lowlands, marked only by lines of willow and a softness underfoot. The trappers learned to read those old channels. The Ho-Chunk read them better, and they would point and say, "Here the water once ran, and here the people once drew it up in clay jars." Animals behaved oddly near the ruined walls. Deer crossed the meadow but did not bed down in it. Foxes denned in every hillside for miles, but not in the mounds. Crows gathered in the oaks above and watched, then flew off without calling. The Ho-Chunk hunters noticed these things. A place the animals avoid is a place a wise man treats with care. When the French pressed for more, the elders shared a little more. They said a people had lived there once who were not their people. Strangers, tall walls of wood, fires that burned all night on the top of flat hills, drums that carried for miles down the valley like the heartbeat of something enormous. And then, one day, no drums, No fires, no people, only the smell of smoke that lingered in the meadow for a whole turning of the moon. How long ago? The trappers asked. The elders only shook their heads. Long ago, before the great-grandfathers of the great-grandfathers. So long ago that the story itself had grown thin, soft at the edges, the way an old hide grows soft from handling. The French wrote some of this down in letters that drifted back to Quebec and Montreal. Most of it they did not write down. A trapper trusts his memory the way he trusts his rifle. And besides, the stories did not seem important then. They were just things you heard around a fire at the end of a cold day, bits of country lore from a people the French were learning to live beside. But the land kept its memory anyway. It did not need writing. It held its memory in the strange lean of an oak, in the thin grass of a burned meadow, in a dry riverbed that no longer drank rain. It held its memory in the quiet of a place where the foxes would not den. 2 centuries later, when settlers finally walked that bend in the river and saw the mounds for themselves, the land was still remembering, still waiting, still keeping the long quiet promise it had kept since the drums went silent. Aztalan is not the only place where a city seemed to rise from nowhere, burn bright for a few generations, and then dissolve into the grass. The story repeats itself across the middle of this country, like a song with new verses. Different rivers, different valleys. The same strange pattern of smoke that rose for the last time and was never lit again. Down in southern Illinois, the great city of Cahokia itself followed this arc. At its peak, it held more people than London. Wooden temples crowned its earthen pyramids. Plazas as wide as small lakes hosted ball games and ceremonies that drew travelers from 1,000 miles away. Then, sometime in the 1300s, the city began to thin. Houses emptied one by one. The fires on the platform mounds burned lower each season. By the time European boots touched the Mississippi mud, Cahokia was a quiet field of grassy hills, and no one alive could say for certain who had built it or why they had left. The same hush settled over a place called Etowah, far to the southeast in the Georgia hills. Etowah had its own palisade, its own platform mounds rising in flat green steps above the river. Copper plates, shaped like dancing birdmen, were buried with its leaders. Shell beads from the Gulf passed through its gates. Then, like Aztalan, Etowah showed signs of fire and struggle. The town was rebuilt. It was burned again. And finally the people walked away, leaving only the mounds and the soft outline of a wall in the soil. In Oklahoma, on a bend of the Arkansas River, the town of Spiro grew rich on trade. Its mounds held some of the most beautiful objects ever found north of Mexico. Painted shell cups, pearl earrings, carved stone pipes, shaped like crouching warriors. Spiro shone like a jewel for a few centuries. And then the jewel was buried, and the bearers walked into the woods. By the time the first French explorers arrived, only stories remained, and even those had grown thin. The pattern stretches further. In southern Ohio, the great earthworks at Newark and Hopewell rose into the sky long before Aztalan was dreamed of. Geometric circles, the size of small towns. Octagons aligned to the moon, avenues of packed earth running for miles. The people who built them seemed to vanish before Cahokia even began. The mounds stayed, the builders did not. You can almost trace a slow tide along the rivers. A city forms. A palisade goes up. Trade goods flow in from coasts the builders have never seen. For a few generations, the smoke rises every morning from 1,000 cook fires. Children grow into elders inside the wooden walls. And then, in a span shorter than a single lifetime, the place falls quiet. The cornfields go to weeds, The mounds become hills. The names are lost. Aztalan fits this rhythm so neatly that it almost seems written into the soil. The same flat-topped mounds, the same defensive walls, the same evidence of fire and abandonment, the same silence afterward, deep enough that the Ho-Chunk and their neighbors carried only fragments of memory about who had lived there. What ties these scattered places together is more than mound building. It is the way each city seemed to peak and fade on a similar clock. Some scholars point to a long shift in weather called the Little Ice Age, when summers cooled and the corn harvests grew thinner. Cold rivers freeze sooner, trade slows. Hungry people grow restless behind their walls. In this view, the whole Mississippian world simply ran out of warm weather, and Aztalan was one of the first northern outposts to feel the chill. Others see a different course. They look at the burned palisades, the arrow points lodged in old timbers, the bones with marks of violence. They wonder if the cities turned on each other when the food ran short. A trading network can become a battlefield once the goods stop flowing. Walls built to impress can suddenly be needed to defend. A third view says the people did not vanish at all. They simply changed. They put away the platform mounds and the pyramid temples. They became the ancestors of the tribes the French and Spanish would meet centuries later. The cities ended. The people walked on. Whatever the cause, Aztalan belongs to this larger family of quiet ruins. It is not a single oddity standing alone in a Wisconsin field. It is one bead on a long string of lost places, each with its own smoke that rose for the last time, each leaving behind only mounds and questions and the patient hush of grass growing over wooden walls that no one rebuilt. The walls of Aztalan did not just fall, they burned. This is the first thing the diggers learned when they cut into the soft Wisconsin soil. Beneath the grass and the dandelions and the dust of 1,000 summers, they found a long black ribbon of charcoal. It ran the full length of the old palisade line, like a scar drawn in soot across the earth. The pine posts were gone, but the memory of them lingered as ash pressed flat into the clay. You can still hold that charcoal today. The museum jars are full of it, black flakes, light as moth wings, soft enough to crumble between your fingers. And yet, after 8 centuries underground, it still smells faintly of smoke when the lid comes off. The fire that took down Aztalan left a smell that has not yet finished leaving. The diggers found more than ash. They found the posts themselves, charred to stumps, still rooted in the holes their builders had dug. Some were burned only at the top, where the wood met the air. Others were burned all the way to the ground, the way a candle melts to a puddle. In the gaps between them, the diggers pulled up handfuls of daub. That was the clay plaster the people had pressed against the wood to seal the gaps. Each chunk of daub still showed the imprint of the cane mats that had been woven against the wall. Some pieces still held the curve of a thumb, the press of a palm, the fingerprint of someone long dead. The fire had baked that clay hard as brick. What had once been soft and grey was now red and ringing. The flames had done what the kilns of Cahokia did on purpose. They had turned a wall into pottery. Inside the palisade line, the diggers found floors, not stone floors, but packed earth floors, the kind that grew dark and smooth under generations of bare feet. Many of those floors were red too, burned in place. On one of them, a clay pot sat upright, half full of charred corn. The kernels were black and shrunken and perfect, each one still a kernel, still the shape of a thumbnail. Someone had set that pot down to cook, and then something had happened, and the pot had never been lifted again. In another house, the diggers found a mat of woven reeds, pressed flat by fallen timbers, preserved by the very fire that should have eaten it. The reeds had carbonized into a black lace. You could still count the strands. You could still see where the weaver had ended one row and begun another. 800 years gone, and the pattern of her hands still showed. There were arrowheads too, not many, but enough. Small triangular points of chert, the kind the southern peoples carried. Some were found stuck in the burned wall itself, driven into the wood at the height of a standing man. Others lay scattered across the burned floors, mixed with the ash, as though they had fallen from the air and never been picked up. Nobody can say for sure who fired them. Nobody can say who they were aimed at, but they are there. You can pick one up in the visitor center and feel the weight of it, lighter than a coin, sharper than a needle. The strangest objects came from the pits. The people of Aztalan had dug storage pits all over the village, deep round holes for keeping corn and nuts and dried meat through the long winters. When the fire came, those pits filled with whatever the wind blew in, burned roof timbers, broken pots, mussel shells, the bones of fish and deer, and sometimes the bones of people. A skull here, a jawbone there, not laid out in any careful way, just dropped in the way you might sweep crumbs from a table. Some scholars say that means a battle. Others say it means a hasty burial during a hungry winter. Others still say the bones came later, tumbled into the pits by tree roots and rain. There is no agreement. There is only the evidence sitting in its labeled drawers, waiting. And there is the ash, always the ash, layer after layer of it, thick enough in places to fill a man's cupped hands. Whatever happened at Aztalan, it happened in fire. The walls came down in flame. The houses came down in flame. The pots cracked in the heat, and the corn turned black in the pots. And the people went somewhere we cannot yet follow. The smoke rose once, and high, and then the rain came, and the grass came, and the centuries came, and the city slept under its blanket of soot, and waited, and kept the rest of its secrets close. When the people of Aztalan walked away, they left no forwarding address, no marker, no letter carved into bark, no grave with a name on it. They simply stopped tending the fires, stopped patching the walls, stopped climbing the mounds at sunrise, and then they were gone, the way fog lifts off a river when the sun finally finds it. The strange thing is how the story of that vanishing has stayed alive. Not in books at first, in kitchens, at long wooden tables in Wisconsin farmhouses, around wood stoves in winter when the windows fogged from stew and breath. Families who lived near the bend in the Crawfish River carried the tale from one generation to the next, like a tin box passed down with the silverware. Grandfather would lean back in his chair after supper. He would tilt his coffee cup, study the dark liquid inside, and tell the children what his own grandfather told him. There was a city here once, he would say. Real walls, real towers, real people who built pyramids out of the soft brown earth. And then one day, they were gone. The walls burned, the pyramids stayed, and the river kept running, the way rivers always do. Each telling shaped the story a little. Some grandfathers swore the people were giants, tall as barn doors, with copper bands on their arms. Others said they were small and dark-eyed, quick as deer, and that they wore feathers braided into their hair. Some said the city died in a single night of fire. Others said the people simply left, walking south in a long, quiet line, carrying their children and their pots, and their seed corn in woven sacks. The polished details changed with each mouth. The core never did. A city stood here. A people lived here. They built something beautiful. And then the trail ended, Farmers' wives kept small things they found in the soil: a bead the color of a robin's egg, a piece of pottery with a curled line painted on it, a flat stone shaped like a fish. They set these treasures on windowsills above the kitchen sink, where the morning light could touch them. Children grew up looking at those objects while they ate their oatmeal. They knew, without being told, that the things on the windowsill had once belonged to someone. Someone with a name, someone with a mother, someone whose voice had once carried across the river on a summer evening. By the late 1800s, the story had gathered new shapes. Some families said the lost people were the Aztecs themselves, blown north by some old wind, building a small copy of their southern empire before drifting home. Others said they were a tribe with no name, swallowed by the woods. School teachers in one-room schoolhouses sometimes told their pupils that the mound builders were a separate race entirely, older than any people now living, gone before the first canoe touched Lake Michigan. None of those stories were quite right, but none of them were entirely wrong either. That is the nature of folklore. It carries truth the way a river carries sand, mixed in with everything else, settling slowly in the still places. In the 1920s, when motor cars first rattled down the gravel roads near the site, picnickers spread blankets on top of the great platform mound. They ate sandwiches and drank lemonade and looked out over the river. The old folks among them would point and say, "This is where the city stood." The young people would nod, half listening, brushing crumbs from their laps. And still the story passed, even when no one was paying much attention. A woman in Jefferson County kept a notebook her great-grandmother had written in spidery handwriting. Inside were a few lines about the mounds. The people came from far away. The great-grandmother had written. They stayed for a time. They left no name we can speak. The woman would read those lines aloud sometimes, to anyone who asked, and her voice would drop to almost a whisper at the end. That is the heart of the family stories, the not knowing. The way the trail simply stops at the edge of the woods and refuses to go any further. Archaeologists can dig and measure and date. They can tell you what the people ate and what they wore and what they traded. They cannot tell you what those people called themselves. They cannot tell you the lullaby a mother sang to her child on the top of the platform mound while the river slid past below. That song is gone, and the people who sang it walked into a silence so complete that even the soil keeps its mouth shut. Step away from the loud debate for a moment. Set aside the question of whether Aztalan was a colony from Cahokia or a copy made by clever locals. Set aside the burnt walls and the scattered bones and the long roads of shell and copper. Underneath all of that argument, there is a quieter truth waiting. Something happened on that bend in the Crawfish River, and it mattered to people. And the proof is that one man rode out into the wet Wisconsin grass to draw what was left of it. His name was Increase Lapham. The name sounds like something carried out of an old hymnal, and in a way it was. He was born in New York in 1811, the son of a canal builder, raised on the smell of fresh-cut timber and wet stone. He had soft eyes and a quiet manner, the kind of man who listens longer than he speaks. He never went to a fine university. He taught himself almost everything he knew, by candle and by lamp, by walking and by looking. When he came to Wisconsin in the 1830s, the territory was still half wilderness. The roads were ribbons of mud. The towns were rough little knots of cabins, leaning into the cold wind off the lakes. Lapham carried a notebook and a brass instrument, and a curiosity that seemed to have no bottom. He drew maps, he counted plants, he measured the depth of snow and the rise of rivers. He listened to old men in trading posts and old women on porches, and he wrote down what they told him. And then he heard about Aztalan. By the time Lapham arrived at the ruins in the 1830s and 40s, the Plows had already been at work. Farmers had broken open the mounds, looking for treasure. Souvenir hunters had carried off the dark, glassy bricks of burnt clay by the wagon load. The wooden palisade was long gone, rotted back into the soil, 1,000 winters before. What remained was the shape of the thing, soft as a memory pressed into a pillow. Low ridges, flat-topped hills of earth, faint squares where walls had once stood. Lapham did what no one else had done. He measured it. He paced the perimeter with his careful, patient stride. He sketched the platform mounds in clean inclines. He drew the river bending around the eastern edge like a protective arm. He noted the gates. He noted the angles. He marked the small mounds and the great ones, the corners and the inner walls, the burial ridges and the stretches of empty ground. When he was done, he had a map, the first true map of a city that no living person remembered building. His drawings still survive. You can find them in old books and dusty archives, and when you look at them, you feel something strange. The lines are so neat. The hand is so calm. There is no drama in them, no wild claim, no fantasy of giants or lost tribes from across the sea. Just a man with a pencil, saying, "This was here. Someone built this. Someone meant it." That is the quiet truth underneath all the louder ones. Whatever Aztalan was, whoever raised those flat-topped hills of packed earth, they were not making a mistake. They were not stumbling through the woods. They chose the bend in the river. They chose the angle of the walls. They chose where the great mound would rise, and where the smaller one would face it. They carried baskets of soil on their backs, one load at a time, for years, for lifetimes. The city had a shape because people had a vision, and the vision had a purpose, and the purpose mattered to them more than we will likely ever know. Lapham understood that. He did not need to solve the riddle to honor it. He simply preserved what was left before more of it could vanish under the plow. His map became the foundation for everything that came after. Every archaeologist who ever staked a string across that ground was, in a way, walking inside the lines that Lapham drew first. He went on to map other things, effigy mounds shaped like bears and birds, scattered across the Wisconsin hills, weather patterns, wild plants. He helped found the National Weather Service, in part because he believed that paying close attention was a kind of love, a way of saying, the world is worth seeing clearly. And so Aztalan sits today inside the gentle frame of one quiet man's attention. A city far from its origins, a people whose names we do not know, a truth simpler than any theory. They were here. They built. It meant something. Stand with me here, just for a while. The road that brought you to Aztalan is empty now. The last car passed hours ago, its headlights swallowed by the long curve toward Lake Mills. You are alone at the edge of the old city, and the night has settled over the river bottom, like a quilt pulled up to the chin of a sleeping child. The grass under your boots is damp. You can smell it, that clean green smell of cut hay and river silt, mixed with the faint mineral cold that rises off the crawfish when the sun goes down. The moon is a thin coin tonight, low and pale, hanging just above the line of black oaks across the water. The stars feel close, so close you could almost lift a hand and brush them aside like cobwebs. In front of you, the great platform mound rises out of the dark. You can barely see its shape, just a soft hill of deeper black against the deep blue of the sky. The reconstructed palisade stands beside it, pale pine logs catching the starlight, each one tipped like the head of a quiet sentry. The walls are silent. They have nothing to defend tonight. The threat whatever it was, past 1,000 years ago. Somewhere out in the marsh grass, a frog calls, then another. Their voices roll across the floodplain in slow waves. A muskrat slides into the water with a sound like a single drop of rain. The river is moving, always moving, the way it moved when the first plaza was swept clean by women with twig brooms, the way it moved when the last fire on the temple mound went cold. Think for a moment about what once stood here at this hour. Torches in clay holders, smoke from cook fires drifting low across the lanes between houses, children tucked into bedrolls of woven reed and deerskin, dreaming whatever children dream when the world is still young. Dogs curled by the doorways, the watchmen on the towers leaning into their long view of the dark, their breath misting in the autumn cold. Now picture the centuries that came after. The walls fell, the roofs caved in, grass grew over the plaza, trees rooted in the soft earth of the mounds and pushed their slow fingers through the bones of houses. The seasons passed in their old quiet way. Snow came, snow melted, floods rose and slid back into the riverbed. Then the farmers came, and after them the curious people who had read the early reports in the newspapers. They came in buggies on Sunday afternoons with picnic baskets. They walked the slopes of the mounds in their good shoes, and many of them bent down and picked up something to take home. A shard of pottery, dark with old soot, a flat stone shaped by a hand long gone, a bead, a bit of burnt clay from the hearth of a house that fell in fire. They carried these things away in handkerchiefs and pockets, souvenirs of a place they could not name. Those small treasures sit now in the drawers of grandchildren who do not remember where they came from. Some are in glass cases in small museums. Some are lost behind the legs of dressers, slipped through the cracks of attic floors, gathered into the dust of estates. The city was carried away piece by piece in the palms of strangers, the way a slow wind carries a hill of sand, grain by grain, into the sea. And still, standing here, you can feel how much remains. The ground under your feet is full of stories, not the loud kind, the patient kind, the kind that wait. A barred owl calls from the woodlot to the east. 8 notes, soft, round, asking nothing of you. The cold begins to work its way through your jacket. Pull it a little tighter. Look up at the stars again. The same stars wheeled over the temple here when the priests climbed the wooden stairs at dawn. The same stars watched the last family pack what they could carry and walk south through the wet grass, leaving the palisade to the wind. You are small here, pleasantly small. Small the way you are when you stand at the ocean or look up at a mountain in good weather. The city does not need you to solve it. It only asks that you stand for a while and listen. The river answers in its low voice. The frogs answer. The wind in the dry corn at the field's edge answers. A soft brushing sound, like pages being slowly turned in a book that has no last chapter. Take one more breath of this cold, sweet air, then walk back toward the road. Time moved on, the way it always does. The farmers grew old and passed their fields to their sons. Their sons passed them to grandsons. And slowly, slowly, the little town of Aztalan began to understand what it had been sitting on all those years. By the middle of the 20th century, the state of Wisconsin had finally bought the land. The plows stopped turning over pieces of broken pottery. The cattle stopped grazing on the flat tops of the platform mounds. A quiet wooden sign went up by the road, and the place was renamed Aztalan State Park. Just like that, a working farm became a memorial. A pasture became a window into a vanished world. Then came the most curious decision of all. The state chose to rebuild the palisade, not the whole thing, but long stretches of it, standing in the exact places the old posts had stood 800 years before. Workers cut tall pines and stripped them smooth. They sank them deep into the earth, shoulder to shoulder, just as the Mississippians had done. They built the little bastion towers too, the square watchboxes that jutted out at even spaces along the wall. When the work was done, something strange happened to the landscape. The ghost city came back. Not the houses, not the people, not the smoke of cooking fires, but the bones of the place rose up again, pale and tall against the prairie grass. You could stand in the field on a summer afternoon and see it the way a ho-chunk hunter might have seen it long ago, walking up from the river, the blonde pine glowing in the sun, the shadows falling long behind each post, the shape of a city that should not have been there. The people of the nearby town learned to live with this strange neighbor. Children in the local schools grew up taking field trips to the mounds. They sat cross-legged in the grass while teachers told them about the princess wrapped in beads. They learned the names of the platforms before they learned the names of the state capitals. The mystery seeped into them young, the way river water seeps into the roots of a willow. Every summer, the park hosted gatherings. Archaeologists came up from the universities to give talks under canvas tents. Ho-chunk elders came to speak about the land their ancestors had walked. Storytellers sat on folding chairs and told the old tales to whoever wandered close. Families spread blankets on the slopes of the great platform and ate sandwiches in the shadow of 1,000-year-old wonder. A small museum opened down the road, in a little white building with creaky wooden floors. Inside, glass cases held the things the diggers had pulled from the soil: shell beads from a faraway sea, pieces of copper traded down from the lakes of the north, pottery with patterns nobody in Wisconsin had ever made before or since. The cases were lit with soft yellow light, and the artifacts seemed to glow from within, like coals that refused to go cold. The town itself stayed small: a general store, a church or two, a few quiet streets lined with maple trees. But the people there carried something the rest of the world did not. They knew, in the marrow of their bones, that history was not a tidy line. They knew the ground under their feet had once held a city as strange and far-flung as any colony on the moon. They knew that ordinary places could hide extraordinary things. This knowledge changed the way they walked through the world. A farmer working his back field would stop sometimes and pick up a shard of clay, turning it slowly in his palm. A teenager driving home at dusk would slow the truck near the palisade and just look. An old woman would tell her grandchildren that the wind sounded different here, that it carried voices if you knew how to listen. Wisconsinites from other counties learned to make the pilgrimage. They came in the fall, when the oak leaves turned the color of old copper. They came in the winter, when the snow drew clean lines along the tops of the mounds, and the pine palisade stood black against the white sky. They came in the spring, when the Crawfish River swelled with melt and ran fast under the bridges, and every one of them, walking among those rebuilt walls, felt the same thing the first French trappers must have felt: a puzzle without an answer, a city without a name, a pine forest standing watch over a ghost that nobody could quite explain. The walls were new, the mystery was old, and the two stood together now, side by side, waiting for whoever might come next. Today, the grass at Aztalan grows soft and even. The state park keeps it mowed in summer. Picnic tables sit near the old plaza. Families walk dogs along the river path. The pine palisade stands in patches freshly cut and tarred, a copy of something far older. Under that grass, the city still sleeps. Soil studies show the floors of houses just below the topsoil. Post holes mark where walls once stood. Cooking pits hold dark rings of charcoal. Storage chambers wait beneath the daisies. A whole town lies pressed flat under 1 foot of dirt, and most visitors never know what they walk above. There was a woman who knew. Her name was Edna. She grew up on a farm near Lake Mills in the years before the park was made. Her father plowed the field that touched the southern mound every spring. His blade turned up pottery shards and bits of burned clay. He stacked them on a shelf in the milking shed. Edna learned to read the broken designs before she learned to read books. She left Wisconsin when she was 19. The Depression sent her west, then south, then west again. She married a railroad man in Wyoming. She raised 3 sons in a small house outside Cheyenne. The land there was flat and dry, nothing like the Green River Bend where she was born. The wind carried sage instead of pine, but she carried Aztalan with her. In her kitchen, she kept a wooden box. Inside the box were 11 pottery sherds her father had given her on the day she left home. Red clay, black clay, 1 piece with a line of tiny stamped circles, 1 piece with the print of a thumb still pressed into the rim. She set them out on the table when her sons were small. She told them the story the way her father had told her. She said there had been a city by a river, and the city had walls of wood as tall as 3 men. She said the people there grew corn and caught fish from the shallows. She said they built flat hills to stand on so they could be closer to the sky. She said one day the walls burned and the people walked away and nobody knew where they went. Her sons grew up on that story. They told it to their own children in towns even farther from Wisconsin. 1 son moved to Oregon. 1 son moved to Texas. 1 son stayed in Wyoming and worked the rails like his father. The story stretched out across the map with them, thinning a little at each telling, but never breaking. In Oregon, the story took on rain. The grandson there pictured the palisade slick with mist, the river fat and grey. In Texas, it took on heat. That grandson pictured the platform mounds rising over dry grass, the wood walls cracking in the sun. In Wyoming, it stayed the way Edna had told it, with the smell of pine and the cold creek at the foot of the hill. Each version was wrong in small ways. Each version was right in the only way that mattered. The city had been real. The people had been real. They had built something so strange that even strangers 6 states away could not let it go. Edna lived to be 91, near the end. She could not always remember her sons' names. She remembered the sherds. She kept the wooden box on the table by her bed. When her granddaughter came to visit, Edna would lift the lid and lay the pieces out one by one on the quilt. Red, black, the one with the thumbprint. She would touch each one and say a word about it. Corn, river, wall, fire. When she died, the box went to that granddaughter, a young woman studying anthropology in Madison. She brought the sherds back to Wisconsin. She drove them to Aztalan on a soft September morning. She walked the path along the river with the box under her arm. She did not put the pieces in the ground. They had been away too long for that. They belonged now to the story, not the soil. She sat on the slope of the northwest mound and looked out over the mowed grass. Somewhere below her feet, a hearth lay buried. Somewhere, a wool post stood broken in the dark. The city slept on. The wind moved through the pine palisade and made a sound like a long, slow breath. She listened. She thought of her grandmother in Wyoming. She thought of the thumbprint pressed into the clay 1,000 years before anyone in her family had a name. The story had traveled far. It had finally come home. So here you are, near the end of the story, sitting at the edge of a quiet Wisconsin field, with the wind moving slow through the grass. The mounds rise around you like sleeping shoulders under green wool. The river bends past the same bend it has always made, brown and patient and slow, and somewhere under your feet, the riddles are still waiting. Think for a moment about what we do not know. We do not know the name these people called themselves. Aztalan is not their word. It is a word borrowed from a Spanish chronicle, pinned onto the site by settlers who thought they had found something Aztec. The real name, the one whispered around the cooking fires, the one shouted from the platform mounds on feast days, that name is gone. It blew away with the smoke 1,000 years ago. We do not know why they came here. We can guess. We can point at the rich black soil, at the catfish in the river, at the wild rice in the marshes. We can talk about trade roads and copper and shell. We can imagine priests with their eyes on the stars, looking for a place where the sky felt right. But none of those guesses can stand up and speak for itself. The reason rests under the mounds, sealed inside silent dirt. We do not know how they got along with the people already living here. The effigy mound builders, with their bears and birds and panthers shaped from earth, were here first. Did they welcome the newcomers? Did they fight them? Did they marry into them? Did they teach them which berries to pick and which springs to drink from? Or did they back away into the woods and watch with quiet eyes as strangers raised wooden walls on land that had never needed walls? The answer is folded into bones that have not been read. We do not know who lived inside the palisade and who lived outside it. We do not know if the walls kept enemies out or kept something sacred in, or both, or neither. We do not know if the watchtowers held warriors or watchmen or singers who called the hours of the night. We do not know what languages floated over the cornfields. 2, 3, a dozen. The wind carried them all away. We do not know what the platform mounds held on their flat summits. A temple, a chief's house, a storehouse of dried corn and sacred bundles, a fire that burned without rest, fed by hands that took turns through the long winter. Maybe all of these in different seasons, maybe something we have no word for in our own tongue. We do not know why they left. The burned posts in the ground tell us fire came at the end. But fire can be many things. Fire can be war. Fire can be ceremony. Fire can be the final gift a people give to a place they are setting free. A city sent off the way a body is sent off, with flame and song and a careful closing of the door. We cannot tell from the char alone which kind of fire this was. We do not know where they went. North into the pine forests, south back toward Cahokia, east along the lakes, west into the prairies, folded quietly into other peoples already living nearby, their grandchildren forgetting the old city by the river. Within 3 generations, they left no trail of broken pottery leading anywhere. They simply stopped being here. And we do not know, in the end, the biggest question of all. We do not know if Aztalan was a colony sent north by Cahokia, like a seed flung on the wind. We do not know if it was a copy, built by local people who had visited the great southern city and come home dreaming of pyramids. We do not know if it was something stranger still, a meeting place where many peoples gathered for reasons that made perfect sense to them and no sense at all to us. Every theory leaves a door open. Every answer leaves a wider question behind. That is why people come back to this field, generation after generation, with shovels and notebooks and quiet wonder. They come because the mounds have not finished speaking. They come because the silence here is not empty. It is full of voices that have not yet found their words. And maybe that is the gift Aztalan gives us. Not a solved puzzle, not a tidy ending, just an open door set into a green hill with the wind moving through it like breath. You can stand at that door for a long time. You can listen, and the river will keep bending, slow and brown and patient, the way it always has. So the fire has burned down now. The wood has gone soft and orange at its heart, and the smoke rises straight up into a sky full of cold stars. The story is told, or as much of it as anyone can tell. Picture the place one more time before you let it go. A quiet bend in the Crawfish River, a field of mowed grass where children sometimes run in the summer. 2 flat-topped mounds rising from the green like old loaves of bread, set out to cool. A line of pine posts marking the ghost of a wall that once stood there, taller than a man, sharpened at the top, planted deep in the black Wisconsin soil. The river slides past as it has slid past for 10,000 years, brown and slow and patient. In the daytime, families walk the paths. They read the signs. They take pictures of the mounds and the trees. They drive away with their windows down and the smell of cut grass in their hair. But at night, when the gates are closed and the parking lot is empty, the place becomes itself again. The frogs start their low chorus from the wetlands. An owl calls once from the oaks. The moon climbs slow and silver over the bluff, and the river turns to a ribbon of pale light. The mounds throw long, soft shadows across the meadow, and if you stand very still, you can almost feel them breathing. 800 years ago, there were fires here, fires on the mound tops, fires inside the houses, behind the wooden walls, smoke curling up into a sky that held the same stars you see tonight. Voices in a language nobody alive can speak.